Hi, my name is Paul Grogan and welcome to the first in a series of videos where I'm going to be teaching you how to play Perseverance Castaway Chronicles, a 1 to 4 player competitive game in which you and the other players find yourselves stranded on a mysterious island which just happens to be inhabited by dinosaurs. With no hope for rescue, it falls upon a few resourceful individuals, the players, to organise the survivors into a functioning society. In this video, I'm going to be explaining how to set up and then play episode 1 for 2 to 4 players. Some of the rules that I cover in this video are also used in other episodes, and I won't be repeating them each time, so you'll need to watch this video first, even if you're just playing episode 2. For the solo game, first watch this video and then refer to the solo rules in the supplemental rulebook, or check out my channel to watch a solo playthrough if I get a chance to do one. A huge thank you to Mindclash Games for commissioning this video, and if you find this video useful and want to support the channel directly, you can help me make more videos by contributing to me at patreon.com/gamingrules. Not all of the components in the game box are needed for episode 1, some of them are only used in episode 2. So the first thing to do is to take out all of the components you need for episode 1 and have them ready for setting up the game. These are all listed on the first few pages of the rulebook. For this video, I'm using the components that come with the deluxe version of the game, which includes the minis for the soldiers and dinosaurs. If you have the regular version of the game, just substitute those for the regular standees. Place the main board in the middle of the playing area. Use the correct side of the board depending on your player count as shown in the bottom right of the board. The board is divided into 4 zones: sustenance, military, expansion and protection. The top half of each zone is called a defence area. This is where the dinos appear and you'll lay traps, build walls and deploy soldiers. The bottom half of each zone is the community area, where you'll build settlements and place dice to resolve various effects. In each of the defence areas, place the matching dangerous combat area tile over the third row, and in each of the community areas, place the matching community area cover tile over the top 4 settlement spaces. Place the Dino Attack Combat Rewards board nearby. Place a breach token on the circular space next to 3 randomly chosen combat rewards. You can do this by shuffling one of the challenge decks and drawing 3 cards at random, using the numbers in the top right of the card to determine which 3 rewards are blocked off. Place the assembly board nearby. Use this side of the board when playing with 2 players, or this side of the board when playing with 3 or 4 players. Take the assembly scoring tiles corresponding to the player count. These 2 tiles for a 2-player game, these 3 tiles for a 3-player game, and flip these tiles over for a 4-player game. Place them on the spaces of the assembly board from left to right in ascending order. Place the assembly reward tiles below the assembly board. There are 4 of them, 1 for each zone. Take the patrol cards and divide them into 2 piles, one with a single reward box and one with 2 reward boxes. Randomly select 2 of the single reward cards and place them face up near the main board. These are the first 2 available patrol cards. Shuffle all of the other patrol cards together and place them face down as a deck next to the available patrol cards. Separate the challenge cards by type, shuffle each deck separately and place them face down near the patrol deck, along with the threat die. Place the dinos into a supply nearby. Place the 2 dino dice, the war die and the trap die near the dinos. Place the food, scrap and story tokens nearby in a supply. Place the 4 officer tiles at random below the main board, 1 for each zone. For your first game, it's recommended to place them as follows: sustenance, the chief mate; military, chief of security; expansion, chief steward; and protection, chief engineer. Each player chooses one of the 4 aspiring leaders and takes the following components: the player board, the leader miniature, and the follower dial set to 10 followers. The player board is 2-sided. For your first game, it's recommended to use the A side. The B side of the board has a unique character ability. All players must use the A side, or all players must use the B side. Each player chooses a player colour and takes the following components in that colour, placing them into their personal supply: 12 settlements, 7 walls, 8 traps, 5 dice, 5 light soldiers, 5 heavy soldiers, and 15 influence cubes. Note that there are 25 cubes per player. You only need 15 of them for episode 1, so leave the rest of them in your player tray. Attach the leader base cap in your colour to your leader miniature and place it on your player board. Place your Valor token, Safeguard token, and Vote token on the 0 space of their respective tracks. Place your patrol marker next to your player board. The top left of your board shows what you start the game with. For the A sides of the player boards, this is the same for all characters. Take 1 food, 1 scrap, and 2 stories from the general supply and place them on your player board. Then move 1 light soldier from your personal supply onto your player board. If you're playing with the character abilities and/or the Chronicle expansion, your starting resources may differ from what I've just mentioned. Each player takes the player aid for their leader with the turn sequence on one side and a summary of final scoring on the back. There's also another reference sheet with Dino attacks on one side and assemblies on the other. Take one die from each player in the game and then add to it a number of neutral dice based on the number of players. For a 2-player game, add 9 dice. For a 3-player game, add 8 dice. And for a 4-player game, add 10 dice. This is the dice pool. Also, when playing with 2 players, add in 2-player dice of an unused player colour to the pool. These are the dissenters and will be explained later on. Once the dice pool has been created, roll all of the dice in the pool. I also like to separate out the dice based on the result. The player who was most recently on a boat is the first player, and play proceeds clockwise, but before the game starts, each player begins the game by placing one of their settlements on the board. Starting with the last player in turn order and proceeding counterclockwise, each player places one settlement on the bottommost settlement space in a zone of their choice. Players must choose different zones. Then, each player places one influence cube on the leftmost empty influence space of the officer assigned to the zone where they placed the settlement. For your first game, it's recommended to place them as shown in the rulebook. And in a 2-player game, after both players have placed their settlement and influence, place one settlement from the dissenter's colour on the bottom settlement spaces of each of the 2 zones not chosen by the players. Choose one of these 2 zones randomly and place one additional dissenter settlement there. On the zone with 2 dissenter settlements, place 2 dissenter influence cubes on the corresponding officer, and place 1 cube on each of the other 3 officers. Before we dive into the main rules, I'm going to explain about assets, what they represent and how you pay them. The number of followers you have is tracked on your follower dial. The player with the most followers at the end of the game wins. Food, scraps and stories are collectively known as resources. Whenever you gain one of these, take them from the general supply and place them on your player board. When you pay them, return them to the general supply. You can never pay what you don't have. Each player has access to 5 light soldiers and 5 heavy soldiers. These brave individuals will help you fend off periodic dino attacks and undertake patrols. When you recruit a soldier, move them from your personal supply to your player board. If a soldier is defeated, they are returned to your personal supply. But if they survive a dino attack or patrol, they go back to your player board, ready to be used again. Your Valor and Safeguard tokens represent your brave deeds and efforts to keep the population safe. When you gain either one, move the corresponding token to the right. Any gained in excess of 6 is lost. When you pay it, move it to the left, and again you cannot pay what you don't have. The number of votes you have is also tracked on your player board. Unlike Valor and Safeguard, you can have any number of votes. If you get more than 10, flip the token over to the +10 side. Votes are essential to gaining followers during the assemblies and are reset back to 0 after an assembly is over. The appendix in the back of the rulebook gives more details about each of the assets, including the ways in which they can be gained and spent. A game of Perseverance consists of players taking turns, beginning with the start player and going clockwise around the table. On your turn, you first resolve your primary action by choosing a die from the pool, placing it onto an empty space on the main board, adding dinos according to the space, and then resolving the effect of the space. Then you will perform one of 4 possible secondary actions. After your secondary action, if you have a patrol card in front of you, you resolve it now. Then, at the end of your turn, if all of the spaces in a defence area have dinos in them, there is a dino attack in that zone. And finally, if there are no dice remaining in the dice pool, there is an assembly, during which players use their votes to gain followers. After an assembly, the dice pool is recreated and the game continues. After the third assembly, or the second assembly when playing with 2 players, the game comes to an end, and after final scoring, a winner is determined. The first thing you do on your turn is to perform your primary action. Choose an effect from one of the community areas that you want to resolve, and then take a die from the pool and place it on an empty die space of that effect. You can choose any dice from the pool, but if you choose a die belonging to another player, you lose 2 followers. Note, in a 2-player game, you do not lose any followers for choosing one of the dissenter's dice. If a space has an icon inside it, the only dice that can be placed there are ones showing that icon. And also, if possible, you must place your die on a space with a matching icon. So here, if I take this die with a book icon, and I want to resolve the politics effect, I must place it on the space with a book icon. But if I took a die with a hammer icon instead, I could place it here. Now the only space left requires a die showing a book. Which brings me on to a very important rule. What if there are no dice left in the pool of the type that you need? Well, when you take a die, you can always pay one story to change that die to any face. Easy. Also, you're not allowed to place a die on a space just to block the space. You have to resolve at least one valid option of the effect. After placing the die, but before resolving the effect, you must immediately add dinos to the board based on the image associated with the space where you place the die. Here, you would just add one trampler, and here you would add one trampler followed by one raptor. The order is important. Some spaces indicate a white stroke yellow die. This means that you will roll one of the dino dice to determine which dinos to place. At the start of the game, you will roll the white dino die for each zone, but once an area becomes dangerous, which I'll explain later, you use the yellow die instead. If the die depicts more than one dino, place them in order from top to bottom. Dinos are placed in the defense areas of the same zone that you placed the die. So if I place the die to resolve the politics effect, the dinos would appear in this area here. Place the dinos one by one on the dino spaces following the arrows. If you would place more dinos than there are spaces, just place what you can and ignore the rest. Remember, dinos need to be placed in the order in which the icons are shown on the board and the dino die. I'll explain later on how you place traps, but if there is a trap on the dino space, you place the dino on top of the trap. If an area is now full of dinos, there will be an attack at the end of the current player's turn. And finally, you complete your primary action by resolving your chosen effect. I'll explain each of them now. In the sustenance zone, there are 3 possible effects. Rations is the easiest to explain. You simply gain 2 food, taking it from the general supply and adding it to your player board. To resolve the patrol effect, take one of the face-up patrol cards, immediately replacing it with another card. Place your chosen card next to your player board. You cannot choose this effect if you already have a patrol card, one patrol at a time. If the patrol card only has one stage, there is no need to mark it with your patrol marker, but if it has 2 stages, place your patrol marker on stage 1. You must then assign soldiers from your player board to the card, at least the number shown in the top left, but you can choose to use more if you want to, up to a maximum of 8. The reasons for why you might want to assign more than what's needed will be explained when I cover the patrol cards in more detail later on. For assignment purposes, both light soldiers and heavy soldiers count the same. The requirement is simply the total number of soldiers. Any soldiers assigned to a patrol card cannot be used for anything else until the patrol is completed, and I'll explain that later in the video. The third effect of the sustenance zone is the pub. This effect gains you 1 story plus another story for each dice of your colour currently in play. Each player starts the game with one of their dice in the game, but there are ways to get more dice, which I'll explain when I cover the politics effect. In the military zone, there is only one effect, training, but it has many options. Choose up to 3 different options from this list and resolve them in any order. Gain 1 light soldier, moving them from your personal supply to your player board. Pay 1 food to gain 1 light soldier. Pay 1 scrap to gain 1 heavy soldier. Pay 1 story to convert up to 2 light soldiers into heavy soldiers. Pay 1 story to place up to 2 soldiers in defense areas. To do this, you choose 1 or 2 soldiers from your player board and place them onto empty soldier spaces. If you place 2 soldiers, you can split them between areas. And each soldier placed on a top row space gains you 1 valor, and each soldier placed on a bottom row space gains you 1 safeguard. Soldiers in defense areas will help you fight off the dinos when there is a dino attack in that area, and they'll return back after such an attack if they survive. And the final option to explain is gaining 1 story. Because you can resolve these options in any order, it's possible, for example, to gain 1 story from this option and then use that story to pay for resolving another option. The expansion zone has 3 effects. First, you can do some political shenanigans with this effect. Choose one of the following 2 options. Pay 1 food to replace a neutral die still in the dice pool with one of your own, ensuring that the die keeps the same side. Then you gain 1 follower for each of your dice in play. Or you can pay 1 food and 1 story to replace a neutral die that has already been placed on the board with one of your own, again keeping the same side. This gains you a fixed 2 followers. Replacing a die on the board does not trigger more dinos from appearing, but why would you want to replace a die that has already been placed on the board? This will become clear when I talk about the assembly later on in the video. The second effect in this area is supply. Simply gain 1 scrap and 1 food. And the third effect is settle, where you choose one of the following 2 options. Pay 1 food to place a settlement onto any empty settlement space in any zone. You gain the bonus that you cover over. These bonuses are all explained in the rulebook. Or you could pay 1 story, 1 scrap and 1 food to place 2 settlements. The first is placed as normal on any empty space in any zone. The second settlement must be placed in a different zone to your first settlement, and it must be placed on the bottommost empty space. And you don't get any settlement bonus from the second one. So why would you want to place a settlement somewhere that doesn't get you a bonus? Again, this will become clear when I talk about the assembly later on. The protection zone has 2 possible effects. To salvage, simply gain 2 scrap. To resolve the fortification effect, choose up to 2 different options from the 4 listed, and resolve them in any order. Option 1. Place one of your traps face down onto any empty dino space in any defensive area. Option 2. Pay 1 food to place a trap, but also gain 1 valor. You have 2 types of traps, one for tramplers and one for raptors. Only you know which type of trap you place, but ideally you want the matching dino to be placed on your trap so you have a higher chance of the trap being effective. Traps will be fully explained when I cover dino attacks later in the video. Option 3. Pay 1 scrap to place a wall on any empty wall space in any defensive area. And option 4. Pay 1 story and 1 scrap to place a wall and gain 2 followers. Walls will also be explained more when I talk about dino attacks later on. After resolving your primary action, it's time to choose a secondary action. There are 4 possible secondary actions available to you, summarised on the reference card. First, you can influence an officer. To do this, choose an officer and pay either 0, 2 or 4 stories to place 1, 2 or 3 influence cubes on the officer, filling the empty influence spaces from left to right. If, when placing cubes, all of the influence spaces become full, all players with at least 2 cubes on influence spaces gain the officer bonus shown here. And then all of the cubes are moved onto the illustration. This is known as the influence pool. Here, for example, there are already 4 cubes in this officer's influence pool, and 3 more on the influence spaces. If you as the blue player choose to pay 2 stories to place 2 cubes on this officer, you would first place 1 cube to fill the spaces. This triggers the bonus, which only goes to you, as you are the only player with 2 cubes on influence spaces. Then the cubes are all moved to the influence pool, and finally you place your second cube onto the leftmost influence space. The total number of cubes on each officer will be important during the assembly. The next secondary action to explain is sending your leader to a community area. To do this, move them from your player board onto an empty leader space in one of the 4 community areas. Then simply resolve one of the effects in that area in the same way as if you had placed a die there, but without attracting any dinos. Leaders in community areas are returned after each assembly. The third option is to send your leader to a defense area. To do this, move them from your player board onto any empty soldier space in one of the 4 defense areas. If you place your leader on one of the top spaces, you gain 1 valor, and if you place your leader on one of the bottom spaces, you gain 1 safeguard. Leaders in defense areas will help fight off the dinos when there is a dino attack, and will return back after that attack. The last option is to place up to 2 soldiers in defense areas. To do this, choose 1 or 2 soldiers from your player board and place them onto empty soldier spaces in the defense areas. And if you place 2 soldiers, you can split them between areas. Like when placing leaders, each soldier gains valor or safeguard depending on which space it's placed. After performing your secondary action, it's time to resolve any of your patrols. Skip this part if you don't have a patrol card in front of you. First, gain all of the rewards shown for the current stage of the patrol. If this is a 1-stage patrol, it's just the rewards shown in the box here. If it's a 2-stage patrol, gain the rewards from the box where your patrol marker is. If there are any challenge cards depicted as part of the reward, draw 1 challenge card for each soldier on the card, drawn from the deck corresponding to that soldier. So here, for example, you have 3 heavy soldiers and 2 light soldiers. So you would draw 3 of these cards and 2 of these cards. Then, from the cards you have drawn, you must choose a number of them as depicted in the rewards box. In this case, you would choose 2 cards. Gain all of the benefits of the chosen cards. If you remember earlier on in the video, I said that it's often useful to send more soldiers on the patrol than needed. Well, this is why. The more soldiers you send, the more cards you draw. Therefore, you have more choice over which cards to keep. Some of the challenge cards have a threat icon on them. These offer greater benefits, but there's a risk that one of your soldiers might die. For each card chosen with the threat icon, roll the threat die. If you roll lower than the number shown on the card, that soldier is killed and returned to your personal supply. Otherwise, they survive. Hurrah! If you have just resolved the first stage of a 2-stage patrol card, you now need to move to the next stage. To do this, you must have at least one surviving soldier. If you do not, the patrol is over, but you still get to keep the rewards from the first stage. Moving on to the next stage is also optional. You could choose at this point to end the patrol early. If you do decide to continue, you must resolve a threat roll as shown on the card between the 2 stages. If you roll equal to or greater than the number shown, all is okay, and you can move on. If you roll less than the number shown, one of your soldiers is unfortunately killed. You choose which one. And if you just lost your only remaining soldier on the card, the patrol is now over. Otherwise, you can move on and advance the patrol marker to the next stage. You'll resolve stage 2 during the patrol phase of your next turn. The final step of patrol resolution is wrap up. Reshuffle all challenge cards back into their respective decks, and if the patrol is over, return any remaining soldiers on the card back to your player board. Keep the patrol card face down in front of you. It could be useful when scoring the Chief of Security during an assembly. After resolving any patrols, it's time to check if there is a dino attack. If a defence area has all of its dino spaces occupied by dinos, there is an attack. There are various phases to resolving a dino attack as shown on the reference card. First is the trap phase. For each trap under a dino, turn it face up and roll the trap die. The various results of the die are shown in the rulebook. The trap could work if it matches the type of dino on the space, or it might work even if it didn't match, or it could fail. Either way, the trap's owner gains some followers. If the dino is defeated, remove it from the space and place it in front of the trap's owner as a defeated dino. Leave the traps on the board for now, they'll be important later on. Next is the wall phase. From left to right, roll the wall die for each wall in the area. The owner of the wall gains any followers or safeguards shown on the die, and also, if this icon is rolled, remove the dino closest to the wall in that column, and place it in front of the wall's owner as a defeated dino. The third phase is the fight phase. Resolve each column one by one. A soldier or leader in the front row fights first, followed by a soldier or leader in the second row. Light soldiers defeat the dino closest to them, and heavy soldiers and leaders defeat their 2 closest dinos. However, if a soldier defeats a raptor, they are also killed in the fight, whether they are heavy or light. Leaders, however, are never defeated. Any defeated dinos are removed from the board and placed in front of the player who defeated them. And any killed soldiers remain on the board for now, but are laid down. This is important for later on. For example, in this situation there are no traps or walls, so it's all down to the soldiers to fight. In the first column, the light soldier at the front fights the raptor, defeating it, but getting killed in the process. The raptor is placed in front of the blue player. The heavy soldier then fights the next raptor, also getting killed. The raptor is placed in front of the yellow player. In the next column, the light soldier defeats the trampler, which is placed in front of the yellow player. In the third column, green's leader defeats both the trampler and the raptor, but survives the fight because leaders are never defeated. The yellow soldier on the second row doesn't get to fight as there are no dinos left. In the last column, blue's light soldier defeats the trampler, but there isn't anybody left to fight the raptor, so it stays on the board. The next phase is the breach phase, which is skipped if all of the dinos have been defeated. But if there's at least one dino remaining on the area being attacked, the dinos breach the defences and can cause trouble. First, for each dino that gets through, the current player loses 2 followers. So if you cause a breach to happen on your turn, you are going to lose some followers. However, based on the situation, that could be the right thing to do, if the damage caused to the other players is worth it. Next, for each trampler that gets through, the topmost settlement from the corresponding settlement area is destroyed. Return it to the player's supply. Then, each breaching raptor attacks a different settlement, proceeding from top to bottom. The owner of each settlement attacked by a raptor loses 2 followers. Any breaching dinos are then returned to the supply. The next phase is combat rewards phase, where players get something for all of their hard work. Sum up each player's contribution to the battle, which is simply the number of pieces that they have in the defensive area. Traps, walls, leaders and soldiers, even killed soldiers. Here, blue has 4 contribution, yellow 2 and green 1. Then, Each player picks a number of options from the combat rewards board based on their contribution as shown here. For example, if you had a contribution of 3 pieces, you would get 2 picks. Each player's choices are made irrespective of the other player, so this can be done simultaneously. Each reward requires you to pay Valour and/or Safeguard as shown, and they are fully explained in the appendix. If there was a breach, the options with the breach token may not be selected by anyone. Also, each option can only be chosen once by each player, except for the player or players with the highest contribution, who may choose to repeat one of the options a second time. For example, if you have 4 contribution, you get 3 picks, and if you contributed the most, you may pick one of those options twice. Let's say there was a breach, so you cannot choose these 3 options, so you could choose this option once and this option twice, paying a total of 4 Valour and 1 Safeguard. The last part of the Dino attack sequence is the retrieve phase. Leaders and undefeated soldiers return to their owner's player board. Defeated soldiers are returned to their owner's supplies. Walls are permanent when built, so they stay in place. Move all traps from the area to beside the Chief Engineer. They may be useful when the Chief Engineer is resolved during an assembly. Return any defeated dinos in front of a player back to the supply. Then, if this was the first time that this zone was attacked in the game, remove the tile covering the 3rd row in the defence area, and the tile covering the settlement spaces in the corresponding community area. This zone is now dangerous, which means a few changes. First, when rolling a die to determine which dinos appear, the yellow die is rolled instead of the white one, which, as you might expect, has more dinos on it. Second, there are now more spaces to fill up before the next dino attack, but defeating them all will be more difficult. And third, there are now more settlement spaces with some powerful bonuses. I've mentioned the assembly many times during this video, and it's finally time to explain what it is. At the end of your turn, if there are no dice remaining in the dice pool, an assembly is triggered. In an assembly, you're trying to gain more votes than the other players. Based on the ranking of each player, followers are awarded based on the current assembly scoring tile. Just before going into the details, there is one term that I'd like to explain first, as it's referred to during an assembly, and that is population. The population of a zone is equal to 2 plus the total number of settlements of all players. This zone, for example, has a population of 5. An assembly is resolved in a series of 4 steps, shown on the reference card. The first step is to distribute the assembly reward tiles. For each zone, the player with the most presents takes the reward tile for that zone. A player's presence in a zone is equal to the number of pieces in their colour in that settlement area, dice, settlements and their leader. Here, the blue player has a presence of 4, which is the most, so they take the reward tile. If 2 players tie for the most presents, each tied player gains a number of votes equal to half of the zone's population rounded down, and nobody gets the tile. Here, for example, both green and yellow have a presence of 3, so they both gain 2 votes as the zone has a population of 5. If more than 2 players tie for the most, nobody receives anything. Note that in a 2-player game, if the dissenters have the most presents, they get the tile. And if they tie with one other player, they get 2 votes as if they were another player. You need to track the votes that the dissenters get. The second step in resolving an assembly is choosing rewards. Each player with 1 or more reward tiles secretly chooses which side they want to use. One side will get them votes, and the other side will get them the assets depicted. Once everyone has made their choice, players reveal their tiles. If you choose the production side of the tile, gain 2 of the depicted assets. If you choose the votes side of the tile, you gain votes equal to the population of the zone. However, when choosing which side of the tile to use, you have to take into account that the player with the second highest presence in that zone gets a benefit too. That benefit is half the reward on the side of the tile that you didn't choose. For example, if you have the tile for the military zone and you choose to take votes, the player with the second highest presence in that zone would gain 1 light soldier. But if you had chosen to take 2 light soldiers instead, the other player would get votes equal to half the population rounded down. If there is a tie for the second most presence in an area, nobody else gets anything, so you can choose whatever side of the tile works best for you without worrying about what somebody else is going to get. Once all of the votes have been counted, rank each player based on the number of votes they have. The players then gain followers as per the current assembly scoring tile. Here, for example, the player with the most votes gains 14 followers, and the player with the second most votes gains 6 followers. If 2 or more players have the same number of votes, each tied player is considered to be ranked the same. For example, in a 3-player game, if 2 players tie for the most, they both gain 14 followers, and the third player would gain 6 followers. Any players who have no vote at all cannot gain followers during an assembly. In a 2-player game, the dissenters can claim first or second place in an assembly. Do not track the followers they gain, but this will affect the followers gained by other players. The next step is to score the officers. For each officer, the player or players with the most influence cubes on it gain followers based on the scoring condition. Cubes in the influence pool and on the influence spaces count towards this. Then, the player or players with the second most cubes gain half the followers rounded down based on the same condition. In this case, green has the most and scores the condition on the tile, and then blue scores half. Ties are friendly, so here, blue and green would gain followers based on the condition, and then yellow and red would gain half the followers based on the condition. In a 2-player game, the dissenters do not gain followers, but their cubes count as if they were another player. The scoring conditions for each of the officers is explained fully in the appendix, but in summary, the chief mate gives followers based on the number of pieces you have in a chosen area, either a defence area or a community area. The chief of security gains followers for each of your patrol cards. The chief steward gives followers for each set of 2 settlements and dice in play. The chief engineer gives followers for each of your traps or walls, even traps which have been used. The final step of an assembly is to wrap things up. Return all leaders in community areas back to their owners. Leaders in defence areas stay where they are. Collect all dice from the board and place them in the dice pool. You then need to change the dice pool if playing a 2 or 4-player game. No changes are needed for a 3-player game. In a 2-player game, add 2 more dissenter dice to the pool. Then place 1 dissenter influence cube on each officer, placing it on an influence space which could trigger an officer bonus. In a 4-player game, remove 1 neutral die from the pool after the first assembly only. Once the dice pool is recreated, roll it ready for the next round. Place the 2 available patrol cards on the bottom of the patrol deck in a random order, and reveal 2 new ones. Remove the leftmost assembly scoring tile and slide the others to the left. Reset each player's votes back to 0. After the second assembly in a 2-player game, or after the third assembly in a 3- and 4-player game, the game ends and you perform final scoring. First, each player adds up the total number of walls and traps that they have on the board, and is ranked in a similar way to assembly scoring with votes, including the rules for friendly ties. Players score followers based on their rank as shown here. Next, each player adds up the number of soldiers and possibly their leader that they have across all defence areas, and is ranked in the same way, again scoring followers like you have done for the walls and traps. Essentially, things you have in the defence areas at the end of the game will still score you some points even if they weren't used to fight off a dino attack. Finally, players score points for any leftover assets as shown here. And that is how you play Perseverance Episode 1. In the back of the rulebook you'll find a set of variant rules for those players who like things a little bit more deterministic. If you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment, and do the same if you've got any questions about the game. Thank you again to Mind Clash Games for sponsoring this video, and to all of my Patreon supporters who help fund the channel. Until next time, take care, and thanks for watching.